Creepy things happen before the grave.
Molly by Ryan G. Peacock, Head of Spectre. The Babcock house wasn't really a part of our town. It sat isolated from the rest of the community at the end of an old dirt road. It was easy to forget that it had ever existed in the first place. I don't know just how long it had been abandoned, certainly before my time. The rumors said there had been a fire around 50 years ago that had killed the residents. There was probably some truth to that. There were signs of a fire inside. Wood was blackened and charred, and the house honestly seemed on the verge of collapse. Nobody was surprised when the city decided to tear it down, and almost nobody showed any interest in stopping it. There wasn't much to preserve, although that wasn't to say there was absolutely nothing. The almost nobody was Miss Isabel Cameron. She was something of a history buff. Outside of teaching at the local high school, she was the chairman of our little town's Historical Preservation Society. We had very little of note to preserve, save for some old relics. Northern Ontario wasn't an area of great historical significance, and our little town had no claim to fame. I choose not to say what town that is, since I'd like it to stay that way. Ever since I was young, I'd always liked the quietness of my home. It was safe and out of the way. I always thought that was what home was supposed to be. When Miss Cameron had heard about the demolition of the Babcock house, she tried to save it. Nobody bothered to rally behind her cause, and when she realized she was fighting a losing battle, her priority shifted to preserving the contents of the old house. I don't know if she was doing it out of genuine interest, or if she'd somehow convinced herself that there was something in there worth saving. Documents or antiques? I can't say for sure what she was looking for, but she saw it as an opportunity to get her students involved. I was there for extra credit, along with one other girl, Naomi Rush. While she was hardly my closest friend, we still got along just fine and had hung out a few times before. I'd figured it would just be us, but Miss Cameron had decided to bring in Eddie. I can't say I knew him well, but I knew of him, and that was enough. By all accounts, Eddie Stevens was a self-assured, rich and cocky asshole. I don't think he had a single genuine friend in the world. At some point during the past week, he'd gotten on Miss Cameron's bad side, and so for detention, he'd been asked to come along. Through the bulk of the afternoon, we managed to pack up anything that looked remotely salvageable, and most of it was in the foyer. To the credit of the Babcock house, it probably would have been really nice back in the day. Sure, it looked like the house from the Addams family, but they still lived in a mansion. The day was almost over, and I was bringing down what I intended to be the last box for the day. Eddie was lounging in the foyer and didn't look as if he was remotely interested in doing anything resembling work. He was standing by the window, looking out at the dark clouds above us, and it took him a few moments before he noticed me. "Is that your last box?" he said. "I think," I replied. "I need to go back up to make sure." Eddie rolled his eyes. "Just leave it. This place isn't coming down for a week or so. Can you ask Miss Cameron to hurry up?" "Why? You got some place to be?" I asked. "No, but I'm tired of wasting my day here," he replied. "None of this shit is worth saving." He moved over to the box that I'd packed and nudged it. A few damp old newspapers sat inside. I think he was trying to make a point, but I honestly thought that those papers could be possibly valuable for the historical record they kept, if nothing else. "How do you know what is and isn't worth saving?" Miss Cameron said from the top of the stairs. Eddie looked up at her, biting his tongue to stop himself from retorting as she descended the stairs. I saw Naomi behind her. "You never know just how valuable something is until you've had a good look at it," she said. "I want to do one more walkthrough, just to make sure we've got everything. If you're so eager to get going, start getting these boxes out of the van before it rains." The prospect of manual labor seemed to upset poor Eddie, and as much as I hated the idea of helping him, I knew that I had to. Still, I let him take the first box just so he could get a head start on the suffering while I went over to Naomi. "Find anything interesting?" I asked. "Not a whole lot," she replied. "This is all from one of the bedrooms. I guess it belonged to a little girl." She shifted the contents of the box to show me what was inside. Most of it looked like very old children's toys. A small rag doll sat on top. It looked to be in better condition than everything else. "Isn't it cute?" Naomi asked. She caught me looking at it. She glanced over at Miss Cameron to confirm she was out of earshot before whispering, "I think I'll keep this one. You know, a souvenir." Part of me wanted to tell her not to do that, but honestly, how much harm could it really have caused? Eddie sprinted back through the door, swearing under his breath. "It's starting to rain," he bitched. He looked as if he'd been hit by a single raindrop. "We should just leave, and Miss Cameron can come back for this stuff later." "It's just a bit of rain," I said. "I think you'll live." Even as I said that, I could hear the distant thunder, and both of us knew I'd be eating those words pretty soon. Sure enough, the downpour started as Eddie and I were loading up the van, and when it hit hard. A cloudy sky soon turned into rain that came down in sheets and wind stronger than anything I'd seen before. The forecast had said the skies would be clear, and clearly somebody had fucked up. Miss Cameron and Naomi were waiting for us in the foyer by the time we came back in, soaked to the bone. Miss Cameron stared out the window, regarding the rain as if it was a particularly unpleasant shit taken in her cornflakes. "Leave the boxes," she said. "I don't want the rain damaging them. Let's just give it a few minutes and see if it passes." "Why not just leave now?" Eddie asked. "You said it yourself, the rain would damage some of the stuff in there." Miss Cameron gave him a look that said, "Did you not just hear me say we should wait and see if the rain lets up?" She didn't dignify Eddie's question with an answer, and I can tell that really got on his nerves. "Let's just chance the rain then," he said, and picked up another box. I wonder if he needed practice to have listening skills that bad, or if it came naturally to him. "I said wait," Miss Cameron said, but she got ignored in favor of Eddie's blatant idiocy. With a box in his arms, he made his way to the door and tried to open it. The operative word, of course, is tried. He tugged that thing as if he was reading a Playboy, but the door didn't budge. "What the fuck? Jenny, can you open this?" Miss Cameron said, "Just open it. Let's finish this so we can go." I'd only gotten a glimpse of what was in the box that he was carrying, but it looked like some of the toys Naomi had brought down. Nothing that would be too damaged by the rain, so I figured it'd be fine to help him. I reached out to pull the door and found that it was stuck fast. "Did you lock it?" I asked. I instinctively looked above the door handle for a lock, but if there was one, it wasn't there. "No, I didn't fucking lock it. We're stuck." Eddie set the box down and resorted to brute force. He kicked the door as if he was anything stronger than a pasty white trust fund kid. With all of his awesome strength, he achieved the incredible godlike feat of hurting his own foot. "Nice going, dumbass," I said. He didn't pay me much mind and just swore under his breath. "Language!" Miss Cameron said. She'd taken her cell phone out of her pocket, her brow furrowed. "If we're stuck, let's just call someone. Does anyone have bars?" I reached into my pocket for my phone, only to find that it had no signal. Judging by the look of Naomi's face as she checked her phone, she wasn't faring much better herself. "Are you kidding me?" Eddie snapped. "Well, let's just break a window or something. This place is coming down anyways." "Eddie, don't," Miss Cameron warned, but Eddie's stupidity could not be contained. In his infinite wisdom, he picked up an old coat rack from the corner of the room and assaulted the nearest window with it. Now, in the sane and reasonable world, the window would have shattered, and Miss Cameron would have given Eddie shit for being a reckless dipshit. However, apparently logic had been on the other side of the door when it had closed and inexplicably locked, and because of that, the coat rack splintered. The glass shook, but didn't break, and Eddie was left holding the broken wood with a stupefied look on his face. This may be an inappropriate time to mention this, but I feel really bad for whoever set up his trust fund. What a waste. "Eddie, relax," Miss Cameron said, as Eddie slammed his broken piece of wood against the window again. Predictably, this got him nowhere. After caveman logic had failed him, Eddie's next decision was to double down on hitting the window with things. There was a dining room with an old table and a chair set in a room close to us, and Eddie appropriated one of the chairs for his smashing-related purposes. He succeeded in breaking the chair, then staring at the window slack-jawed and silent. Miss Cameron rushed to his side, ready to stop him from sacrificing another piece of that innocent dining room set in his crusade against the window. "Relax," she snapped. "Just sit down. Let's not break anything else." Eddie didn't talk back to her this time. It was refreshing. Obviously, we can't break the door or the window, so how about we just stop trying? It's pouring rain out there anyways. Let's just keep our heads, stay calm. Once the rain clears, we can try the back doors. Eddie just listened as Miss Cameron spoke before nodding. He stared at the window, still in disbelief. Naomi came up beside me. She'd watched everything unfold in silence, and I don't think she knew just what to say. She'd seen exactly what I'd seen, though. The window shouldn't be that hard to break, she murmured. I saw a bulge in her sweater pocket, no doubt the rag doll from earlier. Maybe it's reinforced or something, I said, and in the back of my mind, I wondered why a burnt-out old house would have intact, reinforced windows. Maybe. Naomi didn't sound convinced, but we both knew that there wasn't any other logical answer. Miss Cameron massaged her temples. Let's just take it easy, she said. Clearly we have some time to kill. Let's just focus on why we came here and try to keep working, all right? I could tell she wasn't a fan of the idea herself, but there really was nothing else that we could have done. I think she was just trying to keep our minds occupied. I respected that. I did another check of the lower level. I was already sure we'd gotten everything, but it was something to do. Naomi had been sent upstairs, and Miss Cameron was supervising Eddie as he tried to ensure we still had a way out of the house. Judging by the faint swearing and scolding I could hear, it wasn't going well. I won't lie, I was starting to get a little nervous. Obviously, I didn't want to be trapped in a rundown old mansion, and the thought of having to spend the night there had crossed my mind. I knew that it was absurd, though. Eddie's dumb brute force would probably get us out, and if it didn't, someone would notice that we were missing, and it wasn't a secret where we'd gone. If mine, Naomi's, or Eddie's parents couldn't reach us through our phones, they'd probably call the police or stop by the Babcock house themselves. Either way, somebody was going to come for us. There was nothing really to worry about. That said, Naomi's sudden scream didn't exactly erase any latent paranoid fears that lingered in my mind. Even from deep inside the house, I could hear the thud of her footsteps as she tore through the halls and towards the stairs. I arrived in the foyer just to see her make it to the ground. She tripped and fell, then rightened herself and kept running until she was almost pressed up against the door. She glanced back behind her, shaking almost violently as she did. Miss Cameron rushed over to her, putting her hands on her shoulders and frantically calling her name. Naomi? Naomi! Naomi didn't respond at first. She just sucked in terrified lungfuls of air, before finally seeming to notice that she'd been grabbed. I'd never seen her like this before. I've never seen her this outright terrified. What's wrong, Naomi? Talk to me! Miss Cameron looked into her eyes as Naomi finally found her voice. There's a girl upstairs. She's upstairs. Miss Cameron frowned and looked up towards the stairs. There was no sign of anyone else. She stared for a few moments before glancing over at Eddie. Go upstairs and take a look around. What? Why me? Just go. This was the first time I've ever seen Miss Cameron outright snap at someone, and Eddie actually recoiled a bit. I glanced at Naomi, wondering if I could help her at all before I realized there wasn't much I could do for her. I'll come with you, I said. Much as I hated the idea of going anywhere with Eddie, if there was someone else in the house, it was probably best for him not to go alone. If Eddie had any cute remarks to make, he didn't make them. He just glanced at me, a look on his face as if he'd just ingested pure, unrefined shit and hadn't gotten the taste out of his mouth. He didn't argue, though. All right, he said, and there was no way he could have said it with more hesitation if he tried. He led the way upstairs and I followed behind him. Despite having just been up there less than a half an hour ago, something felt off. Maybe it was just my own nerves. Maybe someone else really was up there. It was hard to say for sure. Hello? Eddie called. I would have been more surprised if someone actually had answered him. Instead, his voice rang hollow through the halls, and he stood there like a toddler with a soiled diaper, looking around as if he expected someone to just walk out and say, "Hi!" While there was no verbal reply, there was still some kind of a response. A faded rubber ball rolled out of a nearby bedroom. Both Eddie and I stared at it as it rolled into the hall and lightly bumped against my shoe. We both stood there, dead silent, and when someone spoke, it wasn't one of us. Molly? It sounded like a child, a little girl. Eddie seemed to hesitate for a moment before he finally grew a set of balls and took a step forward. Hello? He said again. He took a few more steps towards the door, and as he did, I saw something moving in the darkness beyond. The small, pale figure of a young girl of about 8 emerged from the bedroom. She dragged her feet as she walked, and as we caught sight of her, I felt a sudden panic set in. I knew why Naomi had started screaming now. I wanted to scream too. Once, she'd worn a pretty white dress. Now that dress was tattered and stained with dark blood. She left a trail of it behind her, and you could clearly see each individual bullet wound in her chest. Her breasts were raspy, and each one poured fresh blood down her pale chin. Her eyes were glassy and unfocused. She looked like she'd just been killed. Molly? She repeated. Her voice was a low, wet gurgle. She lurched towards us, and Eddie let out an effeminate shriek of terror before he bolted for the stairs. Honestly, he was the smart one in this situation. I stood there, frozen to the spot and unable to move. The panic had set in, but it had left me immobilized. I took a step back, but I didn't run. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I tried to rationalize this. I tried to find a logical explanation. Give her back. Give her back. Give her back. Give her back to me! The hands of the dead girl stretched out towards me as she came for me. Finally, I ran. I nearly tripped over my own feet as I ran for safety. The stairs were too far away. There was a bedroom that was much closer, and I went in there. I slammed the burnt-out door shut behind me. I figured that she wouldn't get through that. She was probably just a kid in a costume playing some elaborate prank. I had about 30 seconds to catch my breath before I was proven dead wrong. Where is Molly? The girl stepped through the closed door as if it wasn't even there. In the dim light of that room, I could see a pale glow in her eyes. With nowhere to run, I screamed and fell on my ass before frantically scooting backwards. She continued her slow advance towards me, and I was running out of room to scoot back. In my panic, I didn't hear the burnt-out wood creaking beneath me. Not until it was too late. The last thing I remember is falling. I don't remember the sudden stop. I don't know how much time had passed before I woke up, but at least I did wake up. It was a slow, groggy process. My head was still throbbing, and I could hear the wind howling against the old house. Slowly, I sat up. My entire body was sore. Everything around me was dark, but I was pretty sure I was still alive. In the distance, I could hear a quiet sobbing, and my heart skipped a beat. Oh good, the creepy child wasn't gone. Although I suppose something had to give since she hadn't killed me at least. Slowly, I stood up. The distant sobbing was still there, and I hesitated for a moment before drawing closer to it. It was too dark to see where I was going, and I really didn't have anywhere else to go. My voice caught my throat before I managed to call out, "Hello?" The sobbing stopped. For a moment, I wondered if I'd regret this. "Where's Molly?" asked a voice. I knew it belonged to that little girl, but I couldn't tell where it's coming from. "I don't know," I replied. "I don't know who Molly is." A few moments passed before the little girl spoke again. "I'm cold. I'm sick of being alone. Are you going to play with me?" I don't know. I could?" It wasn't a sincere offer, more of a confused attempt to continue the conversation. "What's your name?" "Victoria," she replied. "Victoria Babcock. Who are you?" "My name's Jennifer. Jennifer Waters. Jenny to my friends." "Are you my friend?" Victoria asked. I hesitated before answering. It's not exactly every day when you get to have a conversation with a ghost. "Yeah," I said. "I think we're friends. Just don't chase me anymore, okay?" "Okay." I felt a cold chill down my back and turned to look behind me. In the darkness, I could see the shape of the little girl. I could hear the blood dripping from her corpse, and the memory of her visage turned my stomach. "Do you know where we are, Victoria?" I asked. "We're in the basement," she replied. The basement? Had I seriously just fallen through 2 fucking floors? "I can show you the way up," Victoria said. She offered me a hand, and after a moment I reached out through the darkness and took it. Her skin felt like ice. It was so cold that it almost burned. "Jesus, you're freezing," I said. I almost pulled back on instinct. "Do you want to wear my sweater or something?" Honestly, I don't know why I even offered. Maybe it was just out of some sense of obligation. Victoria was silent for a moment. It was too dark to see her face. "Can I have it?" she finally asked. Sure, I guess." I took my sweater off. The air around me was chilly, but Victoria seemed like she needed it more, even if she was already dead. I draped it over and tried not to think about all the blood that was getting on it. In the darkness, I saw Victoria pulling in tighter around herself. She exhaled contently. "Thank you. You're kind. Here, come with me. The stairs are here." There wasn't much more light around as we ascended the stairs. We ended up in a small side room that probably once been a parlor. Through the windows, I could see that the sky was dark. I must have been out for a few hours at least. How hard did I hit my head? I thought unconsciousness was only supposed to last a few seconds. Instead, I'd been out for hours. The rain wasn't coming down as hard, and I could see flashing police lights through the window. At least I probably had a ride home. "Are my friends still here?" I asked. "No," Victoria replied. "The boy broke a door. They left. I tried to keep them here, but I wasn't strong enough." "You were the one locking us in?" I asked. "Someone took Molly. I can't let her go." Molly. That name again. "Is Molly your doll?" I asked. Victoria gave a slow half nod, and I remembered the rag doll Naomi had taken. She stuffed her in her pocket, and she probably had it on her way as she fled too. "I think I know where she is," I said after a few moments. I looked towards the flashing police lights through the window, and as I did, I heard people moving through the house. "Bring Molly back to me," Victoria said softly. "Please. She's all I have left. Mom and Dad are gone. I'm gone. I'm cold. I'm lonely." "It'll be all right," I promised her. "I'll get Molly back for you. I promise." Victoria looked up at me. As horrifying as she looked, there was still something innocent about the way she held my sweater tightly around her. I could hear other voices in the house now. A man's voice that I didn't recognize. "She's down there. There's some stairs around the side. Send the paramedics down." Paramedics? I looked past Victoria and watched a man and woman going down the basement stairs we'd just come up. I watched as they disappeared into the darkness, then looked at Victoria. Something was wrong. I walked towards the door and stepped out into the hall. I could see a hole in the floor from where I'd fallen, and I could see police officers standing over it. Miss Cameron stood beside him. She looked like shit. "Be careful with her. She had one hell of a fall," a voice said from the hole, and I slowly approached the edge to look down. I saw myself, laying on a pile of broken wood. My eyes were closed. There were 2 police officers around me, watching as the paramedics lifted me onto a gurney. "No," was all I could say in my own broken, trembling voice. "It's okay," Victoria said from behind me. "You're not cold like I am. Not yet. I hope you come back and play soon, though." I turned to look at her and saw her standing in the hall, blood-stained and holding my sweater tightly against her before my world went white. I spent the next few days in the hospital. I'd broken a few ribs and had one hell of a concussion, but I'd been told I was going to make a full recovery with no lasting side effects. I wasn't sure if what I had seen when I was unconscious was a weird dream or an actual communication with a ghost. There was one way to know for sure, though. I did some research on the Babcock house when I had the chance. There wasn't much to dig up. The records were fairly old, and the house wasn't well known outside of my little town. What I did find, however, was that its former owner, Niles Babcock, had been a boxer and done pretty well for himself. Maybe too well. He'd supposedly been killed in a house fire, but at the time there had been rumors that the fire was only meant to cover up something else. Supposedly, Babcock had made some enemies in Toronto, and those enemies were a part of a little mob outfit. After he died, there were rumors that Babcock, his wife, and their 8-year-old daughter had been gunned down first. I didn't find anything that could verify that, but it felt too specific to be a coincidence. If nothing else, the name of the little girl who died in that house made me sure what I had seen had been real. Her name had been Victoria Babcock. I went back to school the following week, and things seemed almost normal. Almost. I met up with Naomi the first chance I got. She still seemed a bit shaken by what she'd seen, and I was on the fence on telling her about the encounter I'd had. She'd seen enough as it was. I still had to get that doll from her, though. I probably could have stolen it from her using some clever trickery, but honestly, she'd seen the ghost of Victoria Babcock too, and I don't think she was too fond of keeping the memory of her encounter. "Just take it," she said, and handed it over to me without much ceremony. She left it on her bedroom desk and looked out of place amongst her other plushies. "It's been creeping me out ever since I took it from that place." I thanked her and pocketed it, and that would have been the final order of business before Naomi spoke again. "That little girl wanted her doll, right?" she asked. "I think so," I replied. Naomi was silent for a moment. "She must have died really badly. She looked like she'd been shot, didn't she?" "I think she was," I replied. "I read up on the house. Far as I can tell, nobody ever proved it was a mob hit. But, well, if the shoe fits." "Jesus, that poor kid." Naomi sighed and rubbed her temples. "Would you mind if I went with you? I took it. I guess it feels right that I should help return it." "If you want to," I said. Honestly, I was happy just to have the company. Naomi didn't smile. She just nodded, and that was really all there was to say on the matter. The Babcock house still had a few days left before the demolition crews tore it down. They'd already set up a fence, but it really wasn't hard to get past it. The house was as abandoned as ever as Naomi and I approached it. The front door had been taken off of its hinges, probably to prevent it from getting stuck again. Molly the doll sat comfortably in my pocket, and I took her out before offering her to Naomi. "You wanted to give her back," I said. Naomi just took the doll and looked around. "Victoria?" she called. Her voice was small and trembling. There was no answer, nor was there a creepy ball rolling out of some darkened room. There was just an empty old house. "Victoria?" It was my turn to call out, and now there was still no response. The burnt-out ruin sat as quiet as ever, and it almost made me wonder if I'd simply hallucinated everything. "Here," a voice said behind me, and I turned to look. There was no immediate sign of Victoria, but I thought I caught a glimpse of something small and white moving through the distant trees. I didn't say a word to Naomi. I just took off towards it. "Jenny!" I heard her call before she tried to follow me. I could see the movement through the trees, and it let me deeper through them. The path was rough and worn. Naomi and I were probably the first two people who'd come down it in a very long time, but I was sure it would lead us somewhere, and I wasn't surprised. The cemetery turned onto an old dirt road that I passed a few times before. It was one of those old small cemeteries that are full of old graves. There was no chapel beside them, and there was only a small shack near the back of what I assume was a shed full of tools for the groundskeeper. Naomi was silent beside me as we looked upon what I knew was the final resting place of the Babcock family, and she didn't say a word as I made my way through the gate and began to walk amongst the faded tombstones. It didn't take me long to find Victoria Babcock, and it didn't take me long to break into a shed near the back of the property. We didn't dig deep. I didn't want to disturb the grave, but we dug deep enough. Reverently, Naomi placed Molly in the hole we dug and above Victoria's grave. "I didn't know she was yours," was all she said before I began to push the soil back into the hole. It wasn't much, but it was something. A cold wind blew through the cemetery. There wasn't a sound to be heard, or another soul present beside myself and Naomi. I think that was a good thing. Molly was back where she belonged, and Victoria was at peace, or at least as much peace as we could have granted her. I think that was enough. Slowly, I turned and headed back through the woods. Naomi lingered for just a moment longer before she followed me. We'd never speak about Victoria Babcock or Molly again, but that was all right. There's a gas station where the Babcock house once stood now, and there's no memory of that house that used to be there or the horrible things that happened inside. I honestly think it's better that way. The house only invited more disturbances for the Babcock family, and I don't think anyone wants that. Now, Victoria Babcock and her family should rest in peace, and I hope that they do.